And then, as I always say, if you're willing to, please put your cameras on just to make it more like a social experience. Um, and then I'm going to introduce our guest for today. So today, for the second week in a row, we have a special guest. So last week we had Tanisha Singleton talking about Black Girl Hockey Club. This week we've got Abigail Smithson. Abigail is a visual artist who's been involved in a ton of different exciting projects related to sports and culture, which all of you should have skimmed looking through Abigail's website to get a sense of the type of work that she's done. Her projects have taken her through using different types of formats, doing different type of performances, but also traveling around the world, both for research, but also to show this work, which is exciting. So we'll get some of those stories. Abigail Smithson is currently a lecturer in the art and film department at Cal Poly Humboldt, which, oh wait, I'm just letting someone in the room. Your mascot, you're the Lumberjacks, right?
Yeah, it's a terribly insensitive mascot due to the nature of the history of this place. But yes, we
Oh,
are the
that's interesting.
Lumberjacks.
Okay. Oh, right. Wait. This could be. I would sidetrack because I want to hear more about this,
Yeah,
but I'll just leave it. Um. So we got Abigail Smithson from Cal Poly Humboldt. Abigail also hosts the Dear Adam Silver podcast, and then also we are collaborating on a project now, which Emily helped us with over the summer, which I've mentioned before. So let's thank Abigail for joining us today to talk about their work, and then I will turn it over. So thank you for joining us. If anyone else wants to.
thank you so
All
much for
right,
having me.
I
It's
will go
great
on mute. And
to be back. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. Oh,
oh, do I have
I'm
to? I have
sharing
to make you the co-host.
privileges.
Yeah, let
Yeah,
me
thank
make. I'll
you.
make you the co-host. There, you have that power now.
Great. Hey, Emily, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Great. Can we all see this? Awesome. Okay, so we're going to take it way back to start, all the way back to 1998, which I'm guessing that I'm in the minority in this classroom and having been born before then, but maybe not. Maybe there's a few others. Uh, but this is one of the first pieces of basketball art I made. And at the time, I didn't really think about it as basketball art. I was just making something for a report that I had done on Magic Johnson in the fourth grade. So I was asked to pick a subject that interested me. I was a huge basketball fan growing up. This was the height of the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls era in the NBA. And I was a Warriors fan. I grew up near the Warriors, but I was a huge Bulls fan, huge Michael Jordan fan. And I loved watching all the players and following them. And I did a report on Magic Johnson in fourth grade. And this is one of the things that was in the report where I actually found a picture of Magic Johnson's hand that I photocopied and then put my hand in his hand so that we could high five each other. I had no idea that this would have relevance for me later on in life and that I would someday be using it in a presentation. My 9-year-old self could not comprehend that. But this was something that, was kind of a starting point for me. And when I recently found this report just a few years ago, I was like, wow, I've been doing this for a minute, even if I didn't realize it. I think also this title that we're going with today for the presentation, Breathe in an Alley-oop, is really about thinking about connection within the game of basketball, how basketball players find each other. An alley-oop, which we're just going to see an example of in a minute, is a basketball play where one basketball player passes the ball to another in midair. The second player dunks it or lays it up by catching it midair and then putting in the basket. So there's a lot of communication and connection that goes on in that move. So by breathing that in, I think I'm breathing in the connection. I'm breathing in that sort of beautiful moment where players are finding each other on the court. As a witness to it, as a person who's watching the game, I get to take that in and it becomes a part of my existence too. So that's what breathing in an alley-oop is all about. Okay, we're just going to watch this quick example of an alley-oop, an iconic alley-oop between Andre Iguodala and Allen Iverson. Okay, did everyone see that? It happens kind of fast, but we all caught that. Okay, so as I'm sure you know from this class that you're in, whatever's happening on the court is not just that. You know, we have games, we have rules, we have uniforms and the ball and the lines on the court and all of that. But you know that we can look at sports in many different ways. So this is not just this amazing physical feat and this example of connection. It's also about these players, these particular players and their stories, their histories. How are they arriving at the court? It's also about Philadelphia. You know, it's about what was going on with the NBA at this moment. I think if anyone in here is a casual to serious NBA fan, we know that Allen Iverson, this is not his only contribution to the game of basketball. I mean, he was an iconic player who changed the course of history, as all players do in their own way. So just thinking about this as this one moment that's a good example of an alley-oop, but also there's so much more that goes into just that, you know, these tiny little moments. Um, Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit context of where I'm coming from as an artist in this particular moment. So I believe that I'm part of the sports and art movement, the larger movement that's taking place right now that involves artists across the country, across the world who are responding to sports. And from this June 2022 New York Times article that was entitled "The Art World Loves Basketballs and Hoops and Jerseys and Backboards," artist Derek Fordor states that many artists have grown up with the advent of the sports industrial complex. So artists, as cultural observers, would of course be influenced heavily by such a dominant force coming into view. So my take on this is that a generation of artists have now come of age with sports being intertwined with marketing and visual media in a lot of different ways. And it is natural that an art movement would form from watching, playing, and observing sports in so many different ways. So I really think that right now there's a large group of people who are thinking about sports and responding to them through art, and that it's an exciting time to be an artist making work about sports. So just as some examples of artists that are making work about sports to give you more context, this is the piece by Brandon Donahue. He actually takes old basketballs and footballs and takes them apart, sort of dissects them and reassembles them into what, you know, he refers to as these blooms that are meant to allude to flowers, sort of opening up. And we have these shapes that are reminiscent of petals. So Brandon Donahue, he's an artist based in College Park, Maryland. Teaches at the University of Maryland, I believe. Miriam Amirvagefi, another artist who uses sports as a way to talk about winning and losing. In particular, she works at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. She's originally from Iran and moved to the United States to go to school here and realized very early on that there was a lot of barriers to moving here from outside the country that made her feel as though she was not able to win. She was only able to lose within the system, which is a whole topic that can be explored in so many different ways. And she made these sort of love letters to LeBron James through collage that she's kind of like reaching out and trying to connect and thinking about him as a winner, perhaps within the context of sports and what it means for her to connect with him. So she did a whole series of collages for LeBron where she is, you know, using text as a way to connect with the audience and with him as well. Ivan Salcido is a Portland-based artist who made this beautiful version of his grandmother's basketball card. So his grandmother was on a basketball team near El Paso, Texas, the Habaneros, excuse me, and the Little Soaps. And he had this small card that, you know, she had kind of handed down. And he decided to make a large version of this with neon. And so this is his grandmother Eva that he's celebrating and acknowledging her time in basketball and her contributions to the game of basketball. Maria Molteni, another artist who does a lot of painting on basketball courts. There's been a big surge of basketball courts being painted all around the country, but these public spaces being activated in this way. So this particular court is actually in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And there's a lot going on here, a lot of symbolism. We actually have along the outside of the court the nautical alphabet. I'm actually forgetting the name of the person. Kyle, maybe you can chime in. Who, I'm so embarrassed. Who wrote Moby Dick?
Oh, Herman Melville, right?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Herman
Yeah.
Melville. Yeah.
Herman Melville lived in New Bedford. And so we also see this nod to that history, that literary history, the history of it as a port town, and then the nautical alphabet. There's messages on here. So we have the alphabet along the outside, and then there's, the alphabet, which is down here. I'm sort of my cursor's over those symbols. The alphabet is on like the backstop, which we can't see because this is just above the ground, bird's eye view. But there's messages that are encoded into the court here that were chosen by local school children that collaborated with Maria on this court. So they were able to decide certain messages that they wanted to communicate in the court. And then if you go to this court, and I have actually had the honor of helping to finish painting it, you can look at the key, which is the alphabet on the backstop, and sort of decipher the messages. Maria really believes that basketball courts are a way that you can connect with the sky, connect with the heavens, that you're communicating something from what's looking down on the court. So this is messages that you'd want to send up into the universe, the heavens, whatever it is that you believe is above us. Another artist, Bradley Robert Ward, who used a lot of found images from the history of the Negro Leagues, their archive, and printed them out on church fans, or what these pieces that are designed as church fans. So this work was also made around the same time that the Major League Baseball was incorporating the Negro League stats into their stats and recognizing the accomplishments of the Negro League players, but also some of that history within that can get lost and erased and becomes a part of Major League Baseball history rather than the Negro League's history. So honoring these players, these logos, this sort of the culture that went along with the Negro Leagues. This process, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but the way that these photographs are made blue is through a process called cyanotype, which is a older process of photography. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later. Okay, so we're going to start here with my own work now that I've given you context for where I'm at. When I was in graduate school this was in 2016, I was really trying to think about sort of where I was located. I went to graduate school at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. I had just moved there for grad school. I didn't really know that much about Louisiana or Baton Rouge before I moved there. And I was trying to connect with the place that I was living without feeling like I was doing anything sort of predatory. I think a lot of times with photography as a medium, it can feel like even the words that surround photography, it's like shooting, capturing. These are not words that you necessarily want to go out into the world thinking like that's what you want to do. So I was just walking around the neighborhood that I was living in, trying to think about a way to connect with people there and also connect with my, the place that I was living. How could I observe the place that I was living? So I started seeing these basketball hoops. I was like, okay, I'm going to go up to my neighbors' houses or even beyond, not just in my neighborhood, but other neighborhoods, and ask if I can photograph their hoop, lie down in their driveway, and make this image. So I already, sort of knew I was a fan of basketball at this point. I was living in Baton Rouge, going to LSU, which is a very sport-centric school, the flagship university for the state of Louisiana, like leading the SEC often in football, also a big basketball school. So sports were on the brain. So this is another one. And when I took this particular image, I really started thinking about the net. So the hoop was interesting formally. There's this like sort of graphic design quality or typography where you're just trying to get the same thing over and over again. But then the net was standing out to me as really unique. And I started thinking about the nets on basketball hoops as potential sort of recordings of the places that they exist, that they change over time. They change depending on how they're used. They're witnessing every shot that goes in. They're witnessing every shot that bounces off the rim, all the actions that take place on that court, things like that. So the nets all of a sudden held this real power for me, and I started trying to get nets from everywhere. This is one of the first nets I was able to get. And this was a school way out in East Baton Rouge Parish. They have parishes there rather than counties. And this school, actually, this was the year that there was a historic flooding in Baton Rouge. This school was hit really hard by the flood. And this experience, actually, when I went in, I asked if I could bring new nets to the school and, have them basically a trade. I'll provide new nets if I can have your old net. And I realized through this experience that I need to bring way more than that. I need to bring a ladder. I need to bring my own scissors. I need to bring pliers for chain nets, because this situation with this young student actually standing on this man's shoulders to get the net down is not at all what I had in mind when I showed up with the net originally. So I started really thinking about how can I show up with everything I need to, to do this without without the people at the school, at the house, wherever, doing anything. But this was one of the first nets that I got. And then I was just doing it all over the place. I went on a long road trip across the country. I would stop in different towns along the way and see if I could find net. And then all over Baton Rouge, for my thesis work in particular in grad school, I was focusing on Baton Rouge. I was trying to make a portrait of Baton Rouge through basketball nets. But this process of trading out the nets was quite important and valuable because, again, photography, thinking about the language, it's a lot of taking rather than trading. And so how could I figure out a way to make art that involved thinking about documenting a place without feeling like I was doing anything unethical? That doesn't mean that I'm perfect at all, but just that dynamic can be very problematic. And I think especially with photography, again, being the medium that I studied, there can be a lot of there is a unhealthy dynamic with people coming from outside the South, and I'm using this term, the South, really loosely. People can be very drawn to that part of the country, photographers from other parts of the country coming in and making images of a place that they might not know that well or not have lived with. They're thinking that things are beautiful, where we're also seeing extreme poverty. And so I really wanted to figure out a way that felt like that I was in this place at the same time that other people were, and I was engaging with them around the game of basketball, but I wasn't taking something. So that was something I had to really come back to over and over again. I'm still figuring out. So I would only put up nets at hoops that had nets on them already, so I could trade those nets out rather than taking them or just adding them. So it was like, you have something valuable, which is this beat up old basketball net. That's valuable to me. How can I get it? How can I give you something that is valuable to you? So once I started collecting these nets, I was thinking about ways that I could show them, because with art, it's always like, it's not enough to do the first part. You got to think about where it's going to live eventually in some sort of visual way. So I started photographing the nets in the studio. So I would suspend them with fishing line and light them like they were some sort of relic of a time that, I hadn't known. And I was titling them after different places where I found the net. So this one in particular, this is the Department of Juvenile Services in East Baton Rouge Parish. At the time that I lived in Louisiana, Louisiana had the highest incarceration rate per capita in the world. So going into this space, the Department of Juvenile Services, there is also so much, I would say, something to unpack around getting to choose to go into the Department of Juvenile Services to get a net, and the people that are mostly there have to be there, or they are legally bound, or they, they're brought there against their will. And so thinking about like my privilege in that sense of wanting to have this document of this particular moment with this really, knowing, drawing attention to this high incarceration rate, and also recognizing like where I exist within that dynamic. chain basketball nets, huge in Baton Rouge. That a lot of the nets that I got were chain and rusty, and I actually have not, besides photographing them, haven't figured out exactly what I want to do with all these chain nets I have, because they are heavy symbolically, they are literally heavy, they are dusty, they're kind of a mess. It's like they need yeah, I haven't figured out exactly how to do right by all the chain nets that I have, but this is one in particular. I also want to say that these are big photographs. So these are like 5 feet tall, just over 5 feet tall each. So these end up being sort of, for me at least, I'm 5 feet, like a 1-to-1 ratio. It's kind of as though I'm making a portrait of these nets. So this piece in particular, right here, so it's a 5 foot print, but the piece is like this big. It was just the last little bit of net that was remaining on this basketball hoop, but because of the quality of the camera I was able to use, it looks like it's bigger, and how big I was able to print. But yeah, just thinking about all the different variations of nets that you get. I really want to honor the people that came before me and why I think the way I do about basketball nets. So Marcel Duchamp, a iconic artist who was part of the Dada art movement that kind of was trying to push back on institutions that sort of got to set the standard for who gets, what is considered good art, who gets to say what art is. And he brought this urinal to a show that he purchased as his contribution. So this was like a call for art. He was invited to contribute something, and he brought this urinal, signed it our mutt, which is his like sort of his kind of like alter ego signing off on this piece, dating it 1917. It's called Fountain, and he sort of, there's a before Marcel Duchamp did this and an after, and I live in the after time of him doing this, and how we can think about objects in different ways depending on their context. That because this ended up in a gallery, this is an iconic piece of art, but it wasn't something that had been thought about or discussed in such a way before he brought it there. So I was really projecting my own experience of learning about this type of way of thinking about what makes art with these nets, and that these nets could be in a gallery, something that you'd throw out, maybe trash. It's useless, quote unquote, because it can no longer guide the ball through the hoop or whatever. Actually can be seen as art based on the context that it's shared in. So this is like a map that I made of East Baton Rouge Parish with almost all the nets that I got during my time there. Another thing that happened is that I received some thank you notes. One of the schools where I switched out the nets, I received a big stack of thank you notes from students, which was totally not necessary, but very sweet. And they all had these drawings on them. And I was thinking, wow, I'm really thinking about Baton Rouge. I'm thinking about this place. I want to incorporate these drawings made by children from this school into my work. Here's another one. So the PE teacher there had all these students write me notes, and I came home and found a stack of them on my front porch. So I turned them into cyanotypes. So again, cyanotypes is a historical photographic technique that requires a chemical compound that's sensitive to UV rays, and it's processed with water and hydrogen peroxide. So these are sun prints, and maybe some of you have done this before, because there can be like pre-coated paper that you can buy in kits at art supply stores, and you can print outside pretty easily. I was hand coating my own paper in the dark room, but I became really interested in this process because it requires sunlight. So I was printing them outside. So again, engaging with the place where I am, thinking about the sun in Baton Rouge as an ingredient to my work, thinking about the water that comes out of the tap in Baton Rouge as an ingredient. So it just feels like a sort of more holistic way of thinking about like documenting, is that, I could have a sort of perfect photograph of a landscape in Baton Rouge that shows the trees and a refinery, which there are a lot of refineries in Baton Rouge, whatever, some houses, and it could be very realistic. Is that a better document? Is that a more valuable document than something like this, which was drawn by someone who lives in Baton Rouge, which was reprinted by someone who lived in Baton Rouge, using water, using sunlight as collaborators for this print? So that was something that I was really thinking about a lot during this time. Here's another one. Okay, so around this time also, as a fan of basketball, I mean, I'm a fan of college basketball, the WNBA, the NBA, but at this time, um, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, this was right after Colin Kaepernick had staged his a protest where he was kneeling during the national anthem. And of course, we're in 2016 coming into, this actually, this is after 2016. This is coming into the 2017 season. Um, Adam Silver sent an email out, or the office of Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, sent an email out to all personnel reminding them they have to stand for the national anthem, that the NFL did not have a rule against this. So Colin Kaepernick did not break a clear rule, but the NBA did have a rule that states you have to be present on the court standing. So as someone who believes in the right to protest in spaces across the board, I was disappointed that Adam Silver sent out this email reminding players and team personnel of this rule, because I felt that, instead of doing that, you could open up a conversation about the role of protests in sports, or why is the national anthem played before sports games. It's like all these things that we think are just, it's the way it is. It's like, why are these things happening? It doesn't mean that I felt like Adam Silver would do these things. It's just that I felt like he is the most powerful person, one of the most powerful person in sports in the country, maybe in the world, and that he could open up this conversation. Um, so I sent a letter to him saying all of this, and I printed the letter as a cyanotype. So again, I think that process really slows me down and makes me think, like, how is the text formatted? Because it's going to become a visual as well. So I started writing to him about several different things. This initial letter was just about sort of his reaction to the protests and how I thought he could handle it. And then I started writing to him about other things too, and it got a little weird. I'm going to be honest. Like, I started sharing things about my mom. My mom has a artificial heart valve. She has a plastic valve, and I hear it a lot when we're together. I hear it clicking when her heart beats. And so I just decided to share that with him, that I'm like sitting with my mom and I can hear her heart beating. And what does that mean? And what does it mean for someone who's so, I don't have a lot of power in sports. In the way that Adam Silver does. It's like we're at opposite ends of the power dynamic, of the hierarchy. And so what does it mean for me to open up to him? So there were just a lot of different letters that I sent but as cyanotypes. I didn't send them as just letters in the mail. I sent them as like a package, a group of visual art to him. I did hear back eventually from his assistant Bill of NBA fan relations, who just sort of defended Adam Silver a bit to me, some of the things I was saying. But I also have made some work with that letter, that response from Bill, which was nice. So that's where Adam Silver came into it originally. I also at this time was making a lot of drawings of nets, thinking about nets as lines, dots, lines, dots. We have the object itself is sculptural, but also when we're thinking about it, when I'm thinking about drawing them, I was just thinking about what makes up the net, and it's lines and dots, lines and circles, things like that. And then these started to feel kind of biological to me, almost like, and thinking about like what lives inside me, what is my body made up of. And I also made embroideries of these drawings. So these and this was thinking about the colors of the NBA being red, white, and blue, the flag being red, white, and blue, how these colors are sort of taken and given meaning that we associate with certain things before we even know that we're associating them with. So how do I use red and blue in a way that alludes to a flag, the flag of the United States, but also like just thinks about these as two colors, complementary colors that are working off of each other. So these are also larger pieces, like 30 by 40 inches on cloth. Okay, this takes me to Cincinnati, where I had an art residency coming out of grad school, and I wanted to collect as many drawings of a pass as I could. So I would set up this table in different neighborhoods in Cincinnati and ask people that were walking by or at events to draw a pass. What does that look like to them? Can they communicate that? I think that passes for me, going back to the alley-oop, the pass is a very powerful action. It's the way that players find each other. It's the way that a player says, I need help. I can't do this alone. So, and also I would say as a viewer, passing is a very dynamic thing to watch. Whereas, and dribbling is amazing too. Shout out to anyone who can dribble with a lot of skill, but passing is where I feel like the energy from the game really comes from. And so I wanted to give people a chance to draw what they think what a pass looks like to them and get as many different interpretations as possible. I think this is a way of making art that I'm really interested in, where I'm collecting other things that other people have made, and I'm representing, repurposing, making something out of those things. So I had this table, I'd ask people to stop, they draw a picture of a pass, and then I was scanning all of the drawings that were being that I was collecting during this time. And I actually ended up making a shirt out of this one because it's so funny. Those arms are so funny. So then I was making cyanotypes outside. After I'd scan them, I'd print out the drawings on transparencies, and then I was printing them outside in the sunlight on the sidewalk in Cincinnati. So again, really trying to like activate different spaces that, and this is a process of photography that's not widely known about. So it was nice to engage people with that. Of course, it's all dependent on the weather, and strong sunlight is important. And so what I was mostly doing was making these postcards of these drawings that I was collecting. And then that's what was displayed in the gallery. I really like using the mail as an opportunity to engage people beyond just people who are going to come into an art gallery. But sending something on a postcard actually allows for art to be shown to everyone that is working at USPS that's going to handle the mail between me and whoever I'm sending the work to. And also, when I think about taking from basketball what I love and finding it in the rest of the world, I'm not a basketball player. I dabble with horse, but nothing beyond that. So I don't really get to participate in these beautiful moments of an alley-oop or this fantastic behind the back pass or whatever it is. So how can I find passes in everyday life? And for me, the mail is a pass. It's like one thing is being sent off and someone else is catching it on the other side. So this is me finding poetry in USPS, and the process of sending, receiving, responding. And so making pass postcards was a way to get super meta, as far as like, there's a pass on this postcard and you are intended to pass this on to someone else. So I had instructions about like where the nearest mailbox was that people could drop these postcards into. They were already stamped. People could take them and I would replenish them at the gallery. So this was this was like a moment for me in my own practice of realizing when I felt I could find basketball in everyday life. Okay, now we're going to talk about Senda Berenson. Senda Berenson is a women's basketball pioneer. She helped to facilitate some of the first games of basketball ever played by women in the United States. She was born in what is now Lithuania, but was Russia at the time. This is in the 1860s. And then she emigrated to the United States and became a physical education teacher and worked at Smith College down the road from Springfield, Massachusetts, where basketball was invented, quote unquote, by James Naismith. So the first games of basketball designed at the YMCA training school in Springfield. And Senda Berenson heard about these games through a publication and decided to facilitate games for her students that were all women. This is a very different, it was a different game, different rules. It was less recognizable. The two games, the one that the men were playing and the one that the women were playing, very different from each other. But she was responsible for this. So this woman who was born in Russia in the 1860s is from like 2 hours from where my great grandmother is from, who's a little bit younger than her. So I felt this desire to find out more about her and see what information there was about her in the world. In Lithuania, what is now Lithuania at this time. Here's a picture of her at Smith College. right here on the left, beginning a game of basketball with these players, these students around her. Lithuania, a Baltic state, up here, kind of right in between this little Kaliningrad, Russia area and Latvia. And I applied for an art residency with a friend of mine who's a collaborator to see if we could go and research Senda Berenson. Lithuania is a basketball crazy place. People say it's the second religion there. I think that is actually understating how people feel about basketball there. It means a lot to them. During the the Soviet occupation, this was an opportunity when the Soviet Union would go to play teams outside of the Soviet Union, the Lithuanian players would play with the Russian players, they'd play with the Latvian players, everyone would play together on that team. But the Republic of Lithuania was able to play against Russia in other matchups. And it was an opportunity for people there to root against the occupying forces and show their anger and frustration with the state of things. So basketball became a way to channel those feelings of those overwhelming feelings of being oppressed, of feeling like your freedoms are sort of taken away, curtailed. So I think that that's just how basketball lives there as this thing that means a lot, because this is also a very small country. And the basketball players, there's several basketball players from Lithuania in the NBA. They've done well in the Olympics. Like it's just been a force for like the country beyond its borders. So when you get off the plane in Lithuania, there's this amazing basketball hoop that's attached to the baggage claim. So it like starts fast. The basketball comes at you pretty quickly. And I did make a shot into this basket, and it was the first shot I took. And I also need everyone to know that. So we went to the village where Senda Berenson was born. This is my collaborator, Glauco Adorno, on the left here. We went to the village where she was born, where she grew up, and we decided we needed an old basketball from this village. So we asked around at the school for like a local kid who like loves basketball. How can we be put in touch with them? So we brought this kid a new basketball from the mall, and we traded out the old for his old basketball that was beat up. So this was I kind of just had this idea about getting an old basketball because the air inside it would be of this village where Senda Berenson was from, and it would be kind of, again, a recording. And we got a few other older basketballs that we started making cyanotypes with in the village square there. So we were, and this was like, the light is different in Lithuania than it is in Baton Rouge, than it is in California where I am now. Always thinking about recording the light in the particular place. So we were just using the shadows of the basketballs as our objects. And this plaza or square, this village square in this little village, Buttermonis, where Senda Berenson is from, she used to live right on it. I mean, the building that the property that her family lives on, there's another family that lives on that property now. We were able to hang out with them, talk to them. We had an event at their house. Also just acknowledging like the Jewish population of this village was decimated during the Holocaust. The Holocaust in Lithuania worked a little bit different than it did in other places. Instead of people being sort of rounded up and taken out to a concentration camp or something like that, the population was actually rounded up and just taken like a kilometer outside the village and wiped out. So we went into the school where the Jewish population was held before being taken over to this field. And there are markers. Part of Lithuania joining the EU was that they had to mark these places where these massacres had happened. So Senda Berenson, a Jewish woman, had once lived along this plaza. This village now no longer has much of a Jewish population. And so we were thinking also about just like these histories, everything, no one is starting from scratch. We're all operating in these spaces that are alive with these histories. So you can see like Glauco over here is holding the ball a greater distance so we can get a different sense of the shadow. So it was all about how we We're holding the balls in relationship to the sun. And this is how that final piece turned out. So you can see that blue is in there. And these are just the shadows of the basketballs at different times of day. And this is also, we felt like when we were moving these basketballs around on the plastic sheets, that these were also, it was like almost a Ouija board. Like we were using these old basketballs to connect with Senda Berenson in this place that, you know, so much has happened since then. And also it's the same sun, it's the same water. It's like there were things that were elements that were part of these images that we were able to incorporate that existed how they existed for her, for us. So that was an exciting process. My podcast, I have a podcast called Dear Adam Silver that of course the name of it stems from those letters that I started writing to Adam Silver. And this was, sort of my way of maybe carving out a place for myself in sports media. Like, okay, I have something to say. I'm sure after me talking for the past few minutes, you guys realize that I have a few things to say out loud. I also really love the idea of podcasts that, as an artist, it's always about materials and making things. Then you have to store those things. You have to ship those things to the gallery, all this stuff. But with a podcast, you buy the equipment and then it just lives in the air. It just lives outside. And there's not a lot of sort of resources that are taken up with shipping, archiving, whatever. And so I just really like the idea of making a podcast. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, and it was going to be all about sports and art. Now it has manifested itself into a little bit more of thinking about sort of non-traditional perspectives on sports or alternative ways of understanding sports that are beyond sort of headlines or just surface level. I'm not a stats person and I am overwhelmed by those things, or like recapping the game or having a hot take. None of that. It's like longer conversations that are looking at how stories and sports, are tied to other elements of society, which is, I know what you guys are, some of what you're doing in your class. Getting into some new work, I've become really interested in images from yearbooks of sports teams, and a lot of, sort of, especially because so much of women's sports history, a lot of it is told as like a post-Title IX thing. Is like after Title IX, this is when schools had to provide space and like equal treatment of women's sports, things like that. But there was, basketball, almost every sport has been played by women since it started, and it's just whether it's documented and how that story is told. So I went to the archives in my hometown, which is in Redwood City, California. I went to the archives at the library there, and I was just looking at these photographs of women's sports teams from like 1920, 1915, 1935, and seeing these images of these teams. And so I started to also think about these small moments inside the photograph rather than the larger team photos, which I also worked with to begin with. But these small moments of interaction, where someone's hand is placed. Here we actually have like, this hand belongs to someone else, the person behind them. And then this person is holding the ball, the feet being crossed, these like gentle ways that the figures are interacting with these elements that give us a sense of what the image is documenting. And these are also postcards that I made for another exhibition and postcard-sized work. And I really enjoy these small moments. So again, I'm like scanning images and then I'm printing them out on transparencies, and then I'm making cyanotypes. So this is when things get weird. You guys have to bear with me, is because I've also become really interested in Jell-O cookbooks, old vintage Jell-O cookbooks. And I've been cutting them up and making collages with them and thinking about them in different ways. And I was like, how, because sometimes I think I just need to let basketball go a little bit in my work. It's like, maybe I've done enough and I need to take a couple of years off before thinking about basketball again in relationship to art. But basketball and Jell-O share something in common. And that is the bounce. The bounce is crucial to both. So I'm really trying to force them together to make something interesting. So these are these yearbook photos that I got. These are actually from the college that I used to teach at in Arkansas. and I'm just like I'm changing the ball into a jello, or these like gelatinous desserts. I've also made other collages with these pieces. I'm working on a larger one right now where I'm like creating a net of these strips. It's not ready to be shown, but these strips that I'm cutting out of the jello that I'm like constructing a net, just like I was drawing the nets before, embroidering them. I'm constructing a net, a basketball net through the jello imagery. I think that there's also so much wrapped up in this imagery that's like idealistic or meant to be like domestic bliss, like coming home to a table with a, tuna fish, avocado, jello in the middle of it is like what we should all aspire to, and it talks, it's a lot about sort of the culture of the United States in the 50s and the 60s and like gender roles. And there's thinking about like who is in these images, who is being left out of the images that we're looking at, who's not there, thinking about class, thinking about race. So I really like taking them apart because it kind of feels good to be like, these images, like this represents all this stuff that, I'm told I should aspire to perhaps, or these weird expectations, but they're actually like also representing this a lot of sort of maybe ugliness and darkness within the society in the United States. And this is my last image, which is another, this is one of those team photos that I was talking about from the yearbooks. And I'm drawing a net over them or painting a net over them and sort of using the paint as a way to highlight different areas, but also to create blocks around certain areas so that there's this kind of almost like watery effect that you're sort of seeing the image, but not quite. And then the net being a formal element that I just keep coming back to as the net, the net in basketball is meant to guide the ball. It's meant to create a softer landing. But also a net can be seen as something to be caught in, to be restricted by. And so I just want to explore that shape a lot. So all the pieces we just looked at are small. They're postcard size shape. Postcard size. I'm really into postcards and small artwork. So yeah. Thanks so much. That's it.
Let's open it up to any questions you have, and they could be about any of the art you just saw, maybe even some of the art you engaged with in preparation for the class, or just like anything you can think of related to basketball and sports and art and culture. And I'll try not to ask questions for a little bit, and then maybe I'll ask one or two. Let's see. So feel free to like, if you want to raise your hand, you can, but I don't even really know if I'll see that. So feel free to just mute and jump in, or if you want to write it in the chat, you can also.
Should I stop sharing or
Yeah,
should I?
let's go so we can see everyone.
Okay,
Maybe that'll be
cool.
better.
That's great. Yeah.
So who wants to jump in and start? Anything that came to mind.
I'll just keep talking. No one says
What
anything.
got you into the Jello part?
Yeah. I just found an old Jello cookbook at a thrift shop and I bought it and didn't know what I was going to do with it. But I knew that those images are really interesting. I mean, they're all kinds of colors. They're kind of disgusting and really appealing at the same time. And I think that I knew I wanted to do something with them, but I wasn't quite sure yet. And I was kind of hesitant to cut up this book because it also is kind of an antique, and I don't, if I'm going to do something like that, I want to kind of know where I'm going. But then I just started cutting it up and just thinking about there's these really saturated sort of colors, but the colors are not, they all have this kind of particular cast over them. They feel off. They don't feel realistic. And so I just think I'm attracted to that. I'm attracted to that sort of gaudy, over the top, commercialized imagery, and also repelled by it at the same time. So, and I love pudding. I mean, pudding is not Jello, and I will be the first person to say that, but I love pudding. I love the way these Jello constructions look. Sometimes there is pudding recipes in these books, and if anyone starts bidding, going on eBay, know that I am bidding against you for more Jello cookbooks, and I will do what it takes to get the cookbook that I need.
Hold on.
But yeah, I think it's like a pudding thing. That I mean, started with my like childhood love of pudding, and now I'm finding other sort of versions of it.
Estate sales are the best places to get vintage cookbooks. Estate sales, hand down.
Yes, I
That's
actually
mine.
have one from someone else bought me one from an estate sale. So yes, that's great.
Wait,
Yeah, you can get them cheap.
Jello was invented near here, right?
Yeah, there's a whole museum in that
Yeah, it's only
area.
like 30 minutes from Rochester.
Yeah.
Wait, what are the associate out of curiosity, what are the associations people in this like just immediate thoughts? What associations do you have with Jello? And then we'll get back to basketball and sports and art. But what do you have with
But
Jello?
it's
I'm
all
actually
the
curious.
same. It's all the same.
It's all this. What comes to mind with Jello? You can't be wrong.
Like when people uh put people's stuff in the Jello mold. You know what I'm talking about?
Wait, what do you mean people stuff?
Like like as a prank or something like that. I don't know why, but like when they put like a an actual item in like
Oh,
a thing
wait,
of
that's a
jelly.
thing? No, I don't.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I know what he's talking about. Like in the office where they put the it's like a meme from the office where they put the stapler in Jello. It's like a big
Oh,
thing. He
okay.
like puts all his stuff in Jello. Yeah. I was
What
gonna
other
say I don't really have an
associations?
association with Jello. I make applesauce Jello. It's really good. You put applesauce in instead of water, so then it tastes like less jello-y and more like a liquid fruit roll up, and it's really good.
You see, Emily's point in the chat, this is what I was thinking too, because Jello, yeah, it's a domestic product, but I always think of it like at the time Jello came out, it was thought of this is the future, this is progress. It represented progress in a weird way.
Mm,
And so it's like
yeah.
something interesting about the control. It's like control and it's clean and manicured versus sport, which is necessarily like messy and sweaty and like shared like experience with other people. And it's almost like polar opposite directions, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
my
about
mom, sorry.
no, please.
My mom, she's kind of from like Hick, Ohio, hillbilly stuff. And her family has just always collected Jello molds as decorations on the walls. And it just made me think of like, I mean, they don't make Jello a lot. They just have these things on the walls just because it's a very, I don't know, I guess it's a hillbilly thing
Yeah, what
on
does
my
it
mom's
represent?
side.
Well, I think
And
there's a
then
lot
Matt,
of nostalgia associated with Jello and associated with this imagery, which I think that is interesting. I mean, checking my own sense of nostalgia that I'm projecting onto these books so that I'm drawing from it because, of course, when some of them were published, we're still living through the Jim Crow. Jim Crow hadn't ended. It's like, what is going on that would, like thinking about these images, thinking about, the fashion of the people that are in these images, like this nostalgia I have for things and knowing what context, what surrounds it. It's an interesting experience.
okay, other questions, non-Jello related
Or
questions
Jello
related to,
related,
or
either
Jello
one.
related. Yeah, related to the role of the
But I
artist, related to
don't know
sport.
a lot about Jello. I'm just putting that out there. It's like my relationship with Jello just started. Usually my association with it is like something I don't want to eat at a hospital. Like
Yeah.
that's when I think about Jello.
Or apparently Max's link to how to put scissors in Jello.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so questions related to art, sport, culture, all that stuff, other stuff that comes up, or podcasts too. Emily's advice in the chat was you could do a project of putting basketball inside Jello, which actually is kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, I don't think my kitchen can handle that type of situation. Can work towards it.
All right, other questions. Basketball and culture, sport, the space it operates in. What do you process any of that stuff? What do you
Oh,
think?
I had questions. So you said you did like a lot more of like you like the smaller like postcard art and stuff. And obviously like, basketball is like a very big um like space. Like it's a court. Like it takes place in a space and there's like artists who do like the murals on the courts and stuff. Have you considered like what's your opinion on like your relation to like doing like larger pieces that kind of have to do more with interacting with the actual like environment versus like because you're taking and like trading with the environment in your pieces versus like doing something like within the environment there.
Yeah, one thing I think about that is I'm super excited by all the work that's being done on basketball courts, but it's also it's such a trend right now. It's already happening. Like I don't know what I like. We have a range of dynamics there. So it's like there's people that handle the money side of things and then hire people to find people to paint it in a local community or find an artist to do it. And then there's people that are out there themselves, artists that are there themselves. Maria Molteni is an example, like really engaging with the community, finding out like, what do you want this court to look like? Here's my idea. What do you want it to communicate? What do you want it to feel like? So that it like crosses the gamut there of like different styles of approach as far as community engagement goes. I just don't know at this time like what I would bring to that besides highlighting the work. I am not a painter. One thing that I don't enjoy about artwork is all the resources it takes up to make a piece of art. And so when it makes me feel comfortable to actually make smaller work. I also don't like thinking about art as precious necessarily in all of its forms. So the idea that I can just pop a postcard in the mail and it is a piece of art. It's just as much a piece of art as whatever lily pond Monet was painting or whatever else. But it's all of a sudden like the exhibition becomes the USPS is the exhibition space rather than the end goal being a gallery. And also just thinking about like packing materials, things like that. I had those photographs that I printed out that were 5 feet tall, and a couple other things I've made that have been big. And I sold them as soon as I could because I just didn't want to be responsible for schlepping them around the country and taking care of them. It's like I just wanted them to move out of my space into someone else's. So that made me realize like what artwork do I want to keep around? To the left of my desk right now is a whole wall of postcards that I've received or gotten from museums or whatever. And that is the type of art that feels really accessible to me, that I can celebrate and I can put in different compositions with each other. So I think I totally admire the big art people, but at this time in my experience, I'm like, I love going small. Going small to go big.
Okay, let's get another question. That's my contribution is just keep saying, let's get another question.
I
So
was
who's
gonna ask you about the money thing, making from selling your bigger pieces of the small stuff you're doing.
I think I missed just the first part of your question.
I guess you're like getting from it. Like, is it a lot? Like, is it like enough to make a career? Like, I guess I of it.
I think you're cutting in and out, Ariana, but I think is
I
the
think I
main part.
understand.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And let me know if I don't answer. Um, so no, not for me, but also I'm not putting a lot of energy towards selling my work. That's something I could put more energy towards, but I also want to have a regular job that gives me regular money and support and all of that. So I'm not super interested in making like a career as an artist who just sells their work. Um, so with the cyanotypes, that's an interesting thing because and with a lot of photography, they're sold in editions. So I would only make like 3 of those particular prints, and then I would price them accordingly. It would be cheaper, less expensive than a piece that's like one of a kind because I can reproduce that cyanotype quite a bit, or I can press print and make multiple digital prints of an image. So with photography, it's really different than painting or sculpture. In many ways because a lot of those pieces are treated as one-offs. That is also not totally always true with sculpture, but I would say is almost always true with drawing and painting, is that it's just like that piece is just what it is, and so it's worth more than something that I can reproduce. The collage element adds something else. Collages are undervalued in the sense that it's like I'm using found material rather than creating my own thing. It's not my hand. My hand is going through this like these found images. But a cyanotype with a collage that's different from all the other cyanotypes with collages on them, that's going to be worth more than just the cyanotype itself. Or it's easier for me to pitch that as like this one is different. I have to say, like, I'm really far from any commercial art center physically. Like where I'm located in Northern California, the art that sells here is like landscapes and flowers and things like that. But we're rural and we don't have a big connection to like a contemporary art scene. So I would be more tapped into that I think if I lived in a larger city, or if I tried to sell my work more, I'm really not interested in like being on Etsy or, being in those spaces. They kind of just feel soul sucking. And that is not just against anyone here who has an Etsy shop. Like, you take care of you in whatever way feels good, but that doesn't, I just have no energy for that.
And there's like a parallel art and sport market, right? Where it's people who have just gone towards doing designer shoes or like decorating certain Air Jordans and selling them for a significant amount of money. But that seems like a very different space.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I think yeah, I also am really on the outside of that. I mean, it's but power to the people that are in there and are, bringing the skills that they learned in the classes that they took or wherever they trained to make money in those spaces. I I feel like I'm kind of out of touch a little bit with that, trying to get that done. I also want to say that while I don't live in a commercial arts center, I have a gallery inside my house. It's a shelf, and it is not a pop-up gallery. So a pop-up gallery would be something that takes place like for one night, and then it comes down. It's just a small exhibition. This is a permanent shelf, and every other month, I invite four artists to make a piece for that gallery. I should have included photos of this in my presentation. I'm going to blame midterms, the middle of the semester, on the reason there's not photos. So what I do is I think of four artists whose work is really different from each other. And then I think of a word. So the gallery is called Alley Oop Gallery. And the word that I think of has to do with basketball, but it's not does not only have to do with basketball. It's a word that's used in many ways. So the first word was bounce. So I sent out an email to these four artists asking if I could commission a postcard-sized piece that they would just send in the mail based on the word bounce. And then we would have an opening, and I would invite my colleagues at the school and like other people to show up and like look at the shelf and have snacks, which is essentially just a small version of what all galleries are doing. It's like, come here, schmooze, have snacks. And so, but a piece sold from the first exhibition, like the day it opened, quote unquote, a piece sold. And then the second exhibition has gone up and the word is air, and that a piece from that has sold. So like I publicized it on Instagram, and people can also come by. And then the next show will open in December, and that theme is boundary. So I'm like trying to think about like the different elements of the game of basketball, but that you don't have to be a sports and art artist to participate. You can make whatever you want with that theme. So that's been really satisfying and fun. And so I guess I am a bit of an art dealer now, because I'm like helping artists price their little postcards and then facilitating the sale. And those postcards are generally going, I mean, it depends on the artist, but people can price their own work, and I don't take a commission. They get all the money.
Does anyone else have one more question? I've got three questions, and I'm going to try to choose
Mm.
one or two of them. But does anyone else have a question that comes immediately to mind? Because then we're going to run out of time also. Okay, so one question I have is, in most of your art, you don't celebrate the focus is not on like the winning or the best, which is interesting. And I'm wondering how that relates to your relationship to sport. Because one of the things that we see is like there's such a fixation on, you either have the ring or you don't have the ring, or like you're either the best and who cares about second or third. And like that's not what you celebrate in your art or even bring our attention to. And I'm just kind of curious if that reflects your relationship to sport.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as a fan, I've definitely shed some tears over not being a winner, and losing a big game, my team failing in some way. But generally, I've not really played sports in any competitive way. I'm not a super competitive person. It, I remember getting out on a basketball court for like a YMCA league when I was 8, and just being like, I do not want anyone trying to take the ball from me or block my shot, or this is so uncomfortable. It's I just do not connect with it through competition at all. And I mean, it's really competitive to be an artist, and there's this mindset of there's finite resources and we're all going for the same stuff. But like, I just trust that, if I am listening to my intuition and I'm also making work based on something that's particular to me, that like the opportunities that I need will come from that. Um, so I don't find any interest in the winning and losing from an artistic perspective. Yeah, I think that that's it. And I haven't experienced it on the court.
Which is a cool thing because we also associate sports fans as sometimes sports fans are more winning obsessed than even the athletes themselves, right? Where they
I think
get,
we just
yeah,
saw an example of that the other night and during the World Series with those fans grabbing onto Mookie Betts' mitt
yeah.
as she's
Did
going
people
up to
see
catch the
that?
ball.
Wait, how many people saw it? All right, first of all, does anyone pay t attention to baseball, which is an interesting statement about where sport operates? Does anyone? We've got like two. Or wait, are you putting your thumb down? What is that? Does that mean you pay attention, you don't like it, or does it you pay? I don't know what that means.
It's did it
Okay,
kind of sorta because my boyfriend like watches a lot of baseball, so it's more like spewed at me. But not that I don't care. It's just it's not like my choice to watch it. So like I do like know what's happening a lot of the times, and like my roommates also really like it too. They're big Yankees fans, so.
Okay, and Allison put in the chat they ripped out his glove. Look at the highlight. People watch this highlight of people ripping the ball out of Mookie Betts' glove because it's an interesting sports moment. Maybe we'll talk about it in class when I see you again. All right, final question, and then then we'll use up all your time. So you have recorded now 89 episodes of the podcast, which is a lot, and you've shifted. Initially, like you were saying, it was almost exclusively here's artists and how they engage with sports, and now you're bringing on I mean, you're bringing on journalists. You just had Marin Fader on, who's like, I think one of the better sports writers right now, um, like doing this type of like covering basketball or just covering sports in general. What led to that shift from art to just anything sport adjacent?
Well, I felt that I was sometimes having the same conversation over and over again. Not that's not on the artist. That's like on me and learning how to be an interviewer. I mean, this is a whole interviewing is an art, question asking, editing, all of those things. So it's like figuring out the type of conversations I want to have. I think that I felt as though the podcast that I was making was for the people who I was inviting on, and that it was a small community. There's so many artists making work around sports right now, but it's not. I felt like I wasn't tapping in to other people that might be interested. How can I also invite people in that don't have an MFA or a BFA or, aren't familiar with these historical references or who don't like sports? How can I find interesting things for people who might not be interested in sports as I am? So I think that yeah, and I was doing so many episodes during the early part of the pandemic. So, like for me, 5 episodes a month, that was a lot. And I felt like all of them were bleeding together, and I just wanted to expand the reach a little bit. Especially because a lot of the artists I was talking to, like, we're similar ages, we have similar references. And that's not to say that that's not true of journalists, authors, whatever, but that it just expanded the opportunity. And I'm a big reader. So it's just like a way for me to read books and then get to talk about them with people. Yeah. So, and of course, talking about things that are visual on a podcast or any audio medium can be challenging. So and my podcast is strictly audio. I don't have a YouTube or video component. So I think that I was just wanting to have that space not feel dead.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's thank Abigail for joining us again. Maybe turn on your mics again so we can give like some applause. And thank you so much for stopping by, talking about your process, talking about your art, sharing other people's art too. This is really cool, and it's nice to get a different perspective because this is not my area of expertise. So thank you again for joining.
Thanks for having me. I want to say really quickly that Kyle co-hosts my podcast with me sometimes, and I want him to buy a matching sweater that I'm wearing the sweater, and I want Kyle to buy a matching version so we can be really cool together during the recording. So I want everyone to help pressure me to get Kyle to buy this.
Actually, in this case, I do need encouragement because I'm not good at spending money on myself. And the sweater, it's not that expensive, but it's more than I would normally spend on a shirt. So I'm gonna on
It's a
when
sweater,
we
not a
see each other
shirt.
again on the sweater, on the shirt. I need you all to convince me that this would actually be worth wearing and that it would be an incredibly good outfit for me.
And
If
it'd be
anyone
so
disagrees, I
cool
won't
when
buy it.
guests show up and we both got this on. It feels like we're a team. All I want to do is be on a team with other people. So, Kyle,
That's
please.
that's what you've been seeking.
Yes,
All right,
exactly.
I'll get student feedback after. You have teal J's. Oh, that's actually true. I have shoes that match it. All right, maybe I'm
One time
convinced.
purchase, one time purchase.
All
I believe in you. Okay, thank you so much,
right.
everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you again. And
Thank
everyone else,
you.
email me if you have any questions about anything. For people who still are while you're dropping off, I will send out an email what you all have to do. Enjoy Halloween, enjoy the weekend. Talk to you all soon. Stop recording.